when did you really last experiment with your product to understand about your users? So in the intro bar, talked about marketing experimentation. And it's really actually 5 years ago I moved to London to join BlaBlaCar, and I started in the marketing field, trying to experiment with copy of ads, creatives, landing pages. And over the 5 years I've been in London, there's lots of things that have happened in this field. So Facebook has launched ways to split test your ads, Google as well. There's ways to create a landing page in just 2 clicks. So it's getting more and more easy to experiment with your marketing campaigns and strategy. But when it comes to your product, actually when I moved to product, I realized experimentation was seen as something really complicated, or something that only really big companies were doing. So Airbnb, Uber, Facebook. So as John was saying, there's lots of case studies about it online. But where do you actually start with this? And can you even do it in your early stage startup? So what I really want to show today with the talk is that product experimentation, we should really demystify it, and it really applies to all types of startups. And I'm going to give you some tips on how to do it. So my journey across experimentation. So as I was saying, I started about 5 years ago in BlaBlaCar, so one of the biggest European unicorn. I stayed there for quite a while, and then I moved to City Pantry, an early stage startup where I was head of growth, so help with marketing experimentation, product experimentation. And now I'm product manager at Tails.com, so more growth stage startup. So I've seen how product experimentation was playing out at different stages of startup. So Tails.com, a bit of explanation of what we do and why you're going to see so many pictures of dogs in this presentation. So we're all about dogs. So John was talking about nutrition for humans. We're all about nutrition for pets. So your dog as well deserve to have a really healthy life, live a long life thanks to good food. So we tailor the food for them to who your dog is, and we manufacture the food and send it to you every month. So the way it looks like, so as I was saying, I'm product manager in the growth squad. So a squad is a cross-functional team of engineers, designers, and product managers. And our squad is mainly focusing on the sign-up flow. So everything from the moment you land on the website to the moment you receive your first order. So we're really experimenting across this sign-up flow. So it starts from the home page, ask questions about your dog, give you info about what is the perfect food for them, and then get you to their first delivery. So I've been talking a lot already about product experimentation, but what is it really? What do we mean when you talk about product experimentation? So for me, it's really about measuring the impact of the product you release on the metrics you care about. So John talked quite a bit about the metrics there, so this is something to keep in mind there. And that most of the time, that looks like an A/B test. So thinking comparing one version of your website with another version with changes, or another version of your app. But what's really behind this is the mindset. So it's all about evaluating your ideas, testing them, and really make decisions based on data and your customer feedback. So why is it important? So there's a few product teams that sit in the left side of this slide. So usually you would come up with an idea for a new feature with product managers or the stakeholders, build it, ship it, and that's it. And you come back to it a year later, either you find out that your feature is doing great, amazing, you don't really know what happened there, or worst case, you see that nobody's really using your feature, kind of wasted them there, and you don't really know how to improve it further because you haven't experimented with it. So where product experimentation comes in place is really to build this circle of learning. So you first build an hypothesis of what you want to test, what your customer pain point is. So really focusing on the user and why they don't go through your flow or your product as seamlessly as you would want. Think about which metric you want to influence with this. Build the experiment, launch it, learn from it. That's really the important part. If it's successful, go with it, ship it. If not, keep on iterating with this and then you're going to go through this circle quite a few times. And really what it's about is about the learning cycle. So the more you do that, the shorter your learning cycle is going to be, and the more you're going to learn about users and have more successful experiments over time. So if it's that important, what is there like so few, what is there product teams that actually don't do this? So there's usually 3 excuses I hear from startups about why they're not doing product experimentation. So one of them is not having the tools. So it looks like it's probably something really expensive. You don't really have the money to spend on this right now. The second one is about, I don't know which experiments to run. So coming back to prioritization, where do you even start with experimenting with your product? And the third one is really about like being time constrained. So everything is going really fast. In a startup world, you only have like a limited amount of time to make an impact. And experimenting can be seen as really risky. Like you could win it all or you could lose it all. So should you even go after this? I think what's really interesting is that as I was saying, I've been across like early stage, growth stage, and scale-ups. And actually, there's like questions come back at every stage in a slightly different way. So I'm going to show that. But it's really something like if you are today an early stage founder and you think these are really relevant for you, they will probably come back at other stage of your journey. So really, like in the next few slides, I'm going to share like some of the challenges I've had in the past, like working for these 3 different types of startups, like the way we've tried to like solve them, and some ideas of the experiments that we've run that you could potentially apply to your startup as well, and like really get into this rhythm of product experimentation. So first one, early stage startup. So I was telling you about the 3 excuses I hear a lot when talking about product experimentation. And for early stage startup, they usually look like this. So as I was saying, you've got no budget. So you've got only budget for marketing campaigns and some of the things, but like product experimentation is definitely not in your plan at this stage because your fundraise is not big enough just yet. Another thing is like usually like you don't really have a lot of data to play with. So you've got some user going through your website, but actually still quite small. So can you actually make decisions based on these small users and what you see in exit rate or bounce rate? And the third one, that's really quite light. The third challenge I hear a lot about is the win experimentation pressure. So you only have so much time before your next fundraise. Like, should you prioritize this over like this other thing that you think can make an impact as well? One thing there about like the tools you use, it's really a misconception that you have to pay a lot of money to have a testing tool. So there's lots of free tools out there that can allow you to do this. So one of them is Google Optimize, so Google platform for A/B testing that is actually directly linked with your Google Analytics. So with this, you can start doing quite a few what we call client-side experiments. So changing the layout of your website, like adding modules, displaying the information differently to start experimenting with what actually works with your users. The second one about the data is there's really lots of benefit at this stage to use customer feedback as ways to like inform like product experiments. So one thing that is really good to do is like really like sit down with 10 of your users, go through each step of your main flow of your website. So it could be sign up, could be something else, and ask them on each page like what is looking good for them, what is shocking them, what is like really confusing for them. So with like these 10 users, you should start to see patterns already of like the pain points of users on your journey. And that can help you build your first list of product experiment. Or another thing is also like leveraging all the user you get on your website that don't convert. So most of the time we focus a lot on users that convert and that sign up. But like the ones that don't convert, like we rarely ask them like what stopped them. So like just sending an email and ask them, okay, I've seen you've tried to like complete this action today, but you've stopped. Like, what was the issue with the website? Like you'll get a lot of feedback from this, and you'll be surprised of like how many people actually like send you some really good ideas for experiments. And then the third one I think is also something like John mentioned is like at this stage you really want to focus on like the big bets experiment. So really something that is like testing out your business model. So like testing out the way you talk about your product, your pricing, etc. So things that can really move the metrics massively, rather than like small optimization of like changing the CTA color or like changing like an image on your website. So here you really want to see the steps, because especially with your number of users, if it's only like small additional gains, you probably won't see it in the data anyway with your experiments. So a few ideas for experiments you can run at this stage, and that will be really relevant for you if you've never like really experimented with your product. So one thing, as I was saying, is like testing different way to describe your product, your unique selling proposition, but also your sub-product. So if you have several products, like try to iterate in the way you talk about them to see like which one people would actually choose in that setting on your website. A second one to go after is like really to see where you place your main action in the funnel. So for example, when I was at City Pantry, your main action was getting email addresses, so an account manager and salesperson could get in touch with you. So is it better to have it at the beginning of your flow, on the landing page, on the home page, where people know very little about you? Or is it better to actually have it at the end after people have added items to their basket and have really understood your value proposition? And the third one you can actually like experiment with that is going to make a big impact is like your pricing model. The type of questions we had at City Pantry was that we were doing delivery of foods, and we had some costs associated with this to deliver the food. So should we make you pay for the delivery and have no minimum spend, or absorb the cost of the free delivery but set up a minimum spend to make sure we don't lose money on this? So this is a type of like pricing question you can have, and like really finding the ideal balance of it will help you move the metrics quite a bit. Okay, so if you survived the world of early stage startup, you're now a growth stage startup, you've passed your first few fundraise, you set up your free experimentation tool, you've had like quite a few wins with your products, so now what? So now you're gonna start seeing the limits of these free tools. So obviously you wanna run more experiments, so go faster with like your experimentation, your learning cycle, as I was saying. And you kind of wanna have like better data like ongoing. So seeing on top of like which experiment has run, like what has actually happened in each of the variants and why your users have behaved that way. So on the like data side and insight, you start to have like much more data. But sometimes it's quite hard to understand like what's actually happening. Like, what is the blocker in your flow? Like, you've got the exit rate, but is that all the story, or is there something else happening? And then last one on prioritization. So what I've seen is like an early stage startup. Usually you've got a limited amount of people that will like actually give ideas on experiments. The more you grow, the more people are going to add up. And so you start having this like massive list of like experiments you could do, which is really great. But then which one do you actually go after? And is there, should you go after the one from the loudest person in the room? Cool, so it's probably time for you to move from your free tools to paying tools. So there's quite a lot of like good tools out there. So Optimizely, Monetate that we're using at Tails.com right now. And they will help you like build up this experimentation speed, like really run much more experiments, and also improve the quality of the data you get from the experiments. In terms of like data and understanding what's happening, so I was saying for early stage startup, you usually have quite a broad scope when you ask for customer feedback, so a bit everything, you're not quite sure where your pain points are. Now at this stage, you've probably identified what your pain points were. So specific pages, they're like really big blockers. But what on this page is a blocker? Is it usability? So like people cannot really understand like how to use the page. Is it the information, like how it's laid out? Like, is it because you give like too many messages at the top and people stop paying attention? Is it something else? So that's a really good time to involve a user researcher to help you run more like specific user research on one page, for example. And also like on prioritization, it's really the time for you to think about product portfolio strategy. So saying in early stage, you try a lot to do like really big experiments to move the metric. When you're at the growth stage, you actually have the ability to balance these big bets experiments with smaller optimization in the flow that will help you like move the metrics by like 1%, 2%, 3%, which if you run lots of experiments add up to like a really, really nice increase to your metrics and solving a lot of customer issue at the same time. So types of experiments you can run at this stage of startup. So really testing the order of information and journeys. So at Tails, we are a subscription business, and subscription can be seen as quite scary for a few people. So like, can you really opt out of it? Like, can you stop if the product is not right for you? So we've been testing a lot of about where we put cancellation, like messaging about cancellation in our journey. Like, should we put it in very early on so you know that you can cancel anytime, or should we keep it for a bit later so you don't start the journey thinking, oh, I'm going to cancel anyway? So testing nudges to help people go through flow. So one thing we've been experimenting a lot with Tails recently is checkout flows. So there's lots of articles about this online, but there's some very specific design patterns that will make user think that your checkout page is more trustworthy. So like secure messaging, padlocks, that type of thing. Really worth experimenting with this. So if your checkout page is secure already, which I hope it is, how can you really like show it to your users so they go through seamlessly your flow? And the third one is about like testing different designs of a key action. So first, one of the key action is like people understanding what their ongoing price is and like how much sales is going to cost them. So how can we show it in a way that user really understand this? Scale-ups. So last step there. So hopefully you've had lots of like successful experiments in your growth stage. You've got good tools helping you to do it. Now is the next step where you could think like product experimentation. It's just part of your DNA now. Like, what do you have to iterate on? So at this stage, like something really interesting that starts happening is that you start to have to invest like much more time in your experiments to see them being successful. And obviously, that's kind of like the law of diminishing returns. Like, the more you experiment with your product, the better it becomes, the harder it is to move the metrics. So you're going to get in that situation, like doubting a bit of like, can you actually move the metrics further with experimentation? It's also going to be a time where your company probably goes from like one product to other like side products. So either other markets, other type of products you're selling, for example. And this is like really going to show a difference in terms of experimentation, because you know so much about your core product right now that you can know what you want to experiment on. And now you start experimenting with a product you don't know anything about. Like, your users could be completely different with the second product you have. And the third one is like really something about experimentation becoming scarier. So the more users you have, the more you have to lose. Is it really worth it? So that could like, experiment could go very badly, go on social media, everybody start talking about it. Like, what do you do about it? So really something there is like, on the first point, there is like investing more and more time to actually get a successful experiment. You get into a situation where you do test to inform test, which is a really healthy process of like, we don't want to spend like a month's time of engineering time to build this test. How can we test a small version of it to actually inform that it's a good thing to spend more time like building a bigger test? So really getting in this testing mindset, like almost like flip it around and like see test as a way to inform more test. And it's really because like, if that doesn't work out, your small test, you kind of want to go back to the drawing board as quickly as possible and iterate on this. For your side products, you really want to like accept this different level of confidence. Like, you know a lot about your core product. You're building your testing instinct on the side product. So it's fine if the first few experiments don't work at all. Like, you're really like learning about your users there. And then the last one is about really like going into this mindset of you're able to test things in your product with only a subset of users. So if it looks too risky to do test with 100% of your user, you can do it with like 10% of your users, see how it works out, and then like spread it out to more users, or 1% of your users. Okay, and so scale-ups, like the type of experiments you can run, and some coming from like what I've done at BlaBlaCar. You may have heard that BlaBlaCar launched recently like buses as a side product line. How did we go about it to test it? Obviously, you don't want to invest all the time first to like building this new bus business where you don't know how users are going to react or if there's any demand. So there's lots of things we were trying out about like testing out just one line or testing out to add like search results to see, like without even like buses behind it, to see how people were clicking on it and if there was any potential there. Another thing was about like pricing. So as I was saying, in the early stage startup world, you're more trying to find the right price for you. Here, you're more going into different type of prices for different type of users. So you're using really like supply and demand are like subsets of your customer. Does the same price make sense for everybody, or is there like different type of users willing to pay different things? And then the last one is like really going into more like personalized like test and testing for like small segments of users. So at BlaBlaCar, for example, we had people living in the countryside that had like lots of difficulty finding somebody to rideshare with because they were quite far from the main cities. How can you help them specifically have better success on your product? Okay, so there's lots of information. So if you only remember 3 things today, kind of like the top tips. First one is to invest as early as possible in testing tools. So from free tools to paying tools, so like really keep that as a priority, like setting them up, like really like using them ongoing. So something you should always keep at the top of your mind. Using experiments to understand your users. I think that's something that John mentioned. It's not only about moving your metrics, it's like really like solving customer pain points and like improving over time with your product. So use every experiment you run, successful, unsuccessful, as a way to inform your next experiments. Like build a bank of insights over time that you share with everybody, like really iterate on this. And the last one, so you may have seen I've given quite a few ideas of experiments I've run in the startups I was at. I haven't put any figures against it because that's not really what's important. Like some of them were successful, some didn't move the metrics but told us a lot of things. So it's really about like not thinking that 100% of your experiments are going to succeed. Like this is definitely not the case, but this is part of the process. It's really like some experiments will move the metrics, the other one you're going to learn a lot, so the next experiments you can move the metrics. Okay, and because I quite like finishing on a quote, there's this quote about from Mark Zuckerberg that I think is really related to product experimentation, which is the only strategy that is guaranteed to fail is not taking risk. So if you think that it's better not to experiment with your product because it's too risky, you don't really know what's going to happen, well, you're actually going to end up in this place where you don't know anything about your users and you're actually not really moving your metrics either. So really important there. Thank you.
Que la famille.